Hello, my name is Laurence Hoffstadt, and my aim today is to highlight the recommendations that ECHA promotes for you to bring your REACH data up to speed and then to keep it up to date. So my main focus will be to summarize your obligations, to point to items to pay attention to which can support you, and to remind you of the means ECHA has given you to check activities around the substances you have registered. First of all, your obligations. You are principally responsible for registering a complete and compliant dossier as of the date of first registration, and then to keep your dossier up to date going through the life cycle. So your dossier needs to be complete and compliant in terms of quality and requirements according to your tonnage bands. You also need to identify fully your substance in terms of composition and boundary composition for the members of your joint submission, and the identity in terms of its constituents and their concentrations. You also need to identify the uses in the supply chain and during the life cycle of the substance. Finally, when you register first time, if you identify data gaps, you also must propose testing to fulfill your requirements, and ECHA will check these proposals for further testing. And you also have an obligation to review existing registrations. So when situations change, you have the obligation to update without undue delay your dossier. And the European Commission has clarified what this means and generally has given a deadline of 3 months after the change for you to update the dossier. For example, if substance identity changes or if the lead legal entity changes status, for example, or the tonnage band. And a longer timeline and longer deadlines are provided and agreed for more complex changes, such as updating the CSR. And remember, even if you cease manufacture or import of your substance, some of these obligations do not go away. You still have the obligation to provide information if you have received a decision which has been finalized, so adopted by the agency. Then, if your substance is registered at more than 10 tons per annum and also is classified as dangerous or as having persistent bioaccumulative or toxic properties, or very persistent and very bioaccumulative, you must perform an exposure and a risk assessment. And thereby you need to report all hazards and outcomes in the chemical safety report and safety data sheets, and not just the hazards that are classified. You must report all uses and conditions of use, describing them clearly with names, for example, easy to understand. And you need to cover the uses within the supply chain and the life cycle of the substance. You must also identify how you control the risks during the use of the substance. For example, how you minimize the release in the environment in case the substance is PBT. So make sure you use exposure scenarios that are transparent, specific, and exhaustive. And you can benefit from using use maps. I will mention that in a minute. Another obligation is to keep your classification and labeling information up to date. Remember that it's an obligation for you to update in case, for example, a new harmonized classifications is being agreed or voted at the RAC committee. So the classification and labeling in general is independent from the tonnage bands you have registered, and because it characterizes your substance. And you need to use the most severe test results when applying the criteria defined in the CLP regulation. And finally, yes, you must report all harmonized classification. Also, more specifically, in the process of evaluations, you need to react promptly when you receive a draft decision, which means that you should get organized with the members of your joint submission to be able to provide comments per the timeline defined in the legislation in order to exert your rights to be heard during the decision making. When the decision has been finalized and the deadline has been set, you should agree with the members or the addressees of these decisions who will do the requested test on everyone's behalf. And there you must inform ECHA within 90 days of receiving the final decision. When the deadline has passed, you must report studies in format of robust study summaries in your Euclid dossier. And remember that this data needs to be adequate for classification and labeling and for risk assessment. And also, in any case, even if the studies are delayed and you cannot update your dossier providing all this information by the deadline set, you still, in any case, should update your dossier and provide reasons in your updates, because ECHA will check when the deadline has passed, and if no data is being provided, will inform your national enforcement authorities. So to fulfill your obligations, I want to point to you again the tools that are at your disposal. So first, you can use the authorities coordination tool, which can help you being aware and monitoring the regulatory activities that are happening around your substance. And then, of course, to keep up to date. And from these two, you also have links that send you to more specific information. Then, of course, ReachIT is your tool to manage your registration. You can receive notifications of new messages or of new tasks directly in your inbox, email inbox, if you have set it from within ReachIT. Within your company, you should also agree on who should log in and monitor the ReachIT inbox. And this person can therefore ensure that their contact details is up to date and have also set up proper backups where needed. Also in ReachIT recently, we are providing now a dossier evaluation status page, which allows you to follow evaluation activities for your joint submission. So whether you are an addressee of a decision or not, you can still follow activities that are occurring in your joint submission and which may in turn have an impact in your future decision or the future cost of your dossier. And of course, outside of ReachIT, you can use the communication to the members, other means of communication to the members of the joint submission within the supply chain or with industry trade associations, for example. And finally, also, when you update your dossier, we really strongly recommend that you use the iEuclid validation assistant, because it will provide you a report identifying if you have entered the required information in the proper fields and proper sections in your dossier. And that allows you to modify it before submitting it, because then it goes through a technical completeness check and will be maybe rejected. There are also additional resources which can support you. There is the more recently we have put on our website the EU Chemicals Legislation Finder, which is an easy online tool to help you search information from about 40 different pieces of legislations and help you to understand how your substance is regulated through the EU. Across the EU. So it goes from pesticides to water standards, to emissions, cosmetics, and so on. And there you can either search by EC number, so directly your substance, or within each piece of legislation. I I mentioned also the use maps that industry sectors have put in place and which provide brief descriptions of the main use applicable to your substance and can be used easily. It is available within the KSAR tool and can be used directly into your chemical safety assessment. And also, if your dossier is evaluated by ECHA or the substance evaluated by a member state, you can follow the status and the progress of these processes in following one of these links. And you will have in a timely manner the progress through the process. You can search this list by, for example, EC number or substance name. And from there, you are also sent to more specific information or documents. So for your dossier to be up to date, you must provide information which depends both on the property of your substance and on the tonnage you have registered. Deviations from standard information requirements are possible only if they are thoroughly and appropriately justified according to the rules set in REACH. And I also, of course, want to remind you that testing on vertebrate animals can only be performed as a last resort, and in some cases, you need to justify that you have considered other means before deciding to go for animal testing. And this is to ensure no duplication of animal tests. The results, so this information must be adequate for classification and labeling according to the CLP regulation, and we need to help you take further regulatory action depending on the results, and also to consider the impact on other legislation if, for example, your substance would be carcinogenic, mutagenic, reproductive toxicant, or have properties in the environment or as endocrine disruptor. So this presentation was a summary of the recommendations that we have been reminding and promoting over the years, and that is now available on this webpage. If you click one of these boxes, you will then find more information, more details, and also links to further pages or the tables I was just mentioning. And if you need to remember something from what I presented to you today, and that would be that your dossier is your business card, and your registration, like your market volume, is dynamic, and therefore updates are expected and are always necessary over time. Also, a couple of years ago, ECHA started screening all substances and all dossiers to see which further regulatory actions would be needed. So your dossier will be also under scrutiny. But you have the means to check, and you have the means to follow activities that we undertake. And I've described a few of them, so please use them. And here I've provided a few more links to support you before you register or when you want to update your dossier, and also a few more specifics in case you receive decisions from the on evaluation of your dossier or substance. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sampo Karkola. I am head of unit in the Hazard Assessment Directorate here in ECHA. Today I will talk to you about ECHA support to increase the compliance of your registration dossiers. I have three main topics for the presentation. First, I will talk about the background and objectives of this process. Second, I will describe the support that the companies will receive for the process and the pilot project that we ran last year. And finally, I will talk about the benefits of the process and some further considerations to take into account. So first, the background and objectives. In 2018, ECHA and CEFIC published a joint statement on agreement to cooperate to improve registration dossiers. 2019, in the REACH Evaluation Joint Action Plan, there was a clear point for the industry to improve their registration dossiers proactively and continuously. On the same year, CEFIC, in cooperation with ECHA, launched a voluntary action plan, which I will talk more about. And by the end of last year, 190 companies had signed up with CEFIC for this program. The objectives of this voluntary action plan are listed here in this slide. First of all, a voluntary review of registrations of groups of substances by CEFIC member companies. A crucial part of it is a development of category justifications and testing strategies, and it contains a couple of elements. First of all, a review on the existing groups and category justifications and modification of those if needed. Second, identification of data gaps in the registration dossiers and for the whole categories. To optimize data generation, mainly in terms of costs and process efficiency. And finally, to minimize the need for compliance checks. There is informal support available from ECHA, and of course the final end objective is to improve the safe use of substances, as mentioned in REACH. How does the process then look like? The whole thing starts with ECHA when the companies submit to us information on the groups of substances that they intend to work on in the coming year or years. Once we receive that information, we will compare those groups of substances against our own work plan for the next year and the coming years, and select the groups for this interaction process. The next step is that the companies send to ECHA the initial testing strategies, which are then reviewed by us, and we provide informal feedback. We will indicate whether we think it makes sense, whether we have identified some issues to cover, and maybe if some further data generation is needed. The industry, that is the companies, are then expected to adapt the testing strategies and update their testing strategies following ECHA's informal feedback. And that should then end up in a testing proposal submission for the selected substances. Once we receive those testing proposals in the dossier updates, we will then evaluate them through the normal testing proposal examination process, which will then result in decisions requesting the proposed or modified higher tier studies. Then the decision, of course, gives a deadline for the registrants to provide the requested information, which is then submitted to ECHA by the deadline, hopefully. And we will then perform a normal follow-up evaluation to those registration dossiers to conclude whether the category eventually holds and whether the information requirements have been fulfilled. All this is facilitated by CEFIC, so CEFIC is not a counterpart in any of these testing strategy developments, but CEFIC acts as a kind of an umbrella facilitator for the whole time. Once we receive all the information from the registrations, we will then use that for screening work for regulatory risk management. As mentioned, last year we ran a pilot. We had 4 groups of 2 to 15 substances selected together by ECHA and some companies. According to the process, we did receive the initial category justifications and testing strategies, and we then reviewed them and provided the informal feedback. Indeed, after that, the companies took ECHA's advice into account and refined the justifications and the testing strategies. One element here is that ECHA requested to see proof that companies had indeed ordered the lower tier studies, for example, letters from the laboratories confirming the order of the study. And then we also saw, of course, the testing proposals for the long-term endpoints. Here I have listed some important observations from the pilot, basically the learnings. First issue is that the substance identity of the substances must be clear. This is a prerequisite for read-across adaptations and for the whole category justification. We must know what we are looking at and use the information to evaluate read-across. Second point is that supporting information is essential in deciding on substances to be tested for higher tier endpoints. Supporting information here means Annex 7 and 8 studies, but also studies that are not necessarily the standard information requirements. For example, toxicokinetics, metabolomics, and so on. And here important point is that those supporting studies should be conducted before developing a testing strategy. It makes everything work faster. Second, and the next point is that the category read-across justification should follow ECHA's read-across assessment framework, the RAF, available on our website. And the testing proposal should be submitted for the test substances or most probable test substances. And we also noticed that the consortium negotiations are not necessarily very quick. They might take some time. There might be several registrants in the joint submission that need to be contacted and the issues need to be agreed with. Then a little bit of our requirements for groups of substances for this process. We would like to see coherent groups of substances with a similar structure and similar hazard properties. As mentioned already, clear substance identity is crucial for the justifications. We would not like to see any tonnage band changes during the process because that affects on the information requirements of the substances. The groups should be reasonable in size, from let's say 5 to 15 substances. If they are too small, for example, 1-to-1 read across only between two substances, then it's not really worth the effort. We would appreciate if no regulatory processes were ongoing for any of the substances in the proposed group, because that complicates the work quite a lot. And finally, the substances should be in the not yet assigned pool of ECHA's chemical universe. What are then the benefits of this process? Benefits to the companies is on one hand a very systematic review of registration dossiers, ending or resulting in a dossier that is up to date in terms of tonnage, use, and hazard information. You get some time to develop those categories and testing strategies, and you can benefit from informal interaction with ECHA to better understand the regulatory requirements and what do we want to see in the dossiers and justifications in order for them to be compliant. There's much higher chance of data compliance once you have finalized the testing strategy that was agreed with ECHA, once it has been implemented and finalized. There's also, of course, the benefit of minimization of animal testing and reduced costs for the studies. The benefits to the authorities is that we get a clear commitment from the companies that they are generating new hazard information. Proof of lower tier and other supporting data generation is usually required so that we can see the commitment from the company. And then, of course, with testing proposals for higher tier endpoints, we also understand the commitment by the companies. Additional benefits are the data gaps are then filled without the need to open formal and sometimes quite heavy compliance check processes. New data facilitates, of course, further regulatory work. Either we can exclude the substances as low hazard and no need to react, at least at the moment, but also then for potential future regulatory risk management processes. And similarly as for companies, animal testing would be minimized. The grouping by ECHA is a little bit different from grouping by the companies and the industry. I won't talk too much about that because there was just an earlier presentation on ECHA grouping, but I just highlight a few points here. We address groups of similar substances in a holistic manner. And it's much more efficient to do it like this compared to a single substance approach. An important point is that this kind of work avoids regrettable substitution, but we still have a possibility to address substances one by one and open compliance checks where needed. Some things to take into account with the grouping of the substances. Companies have an obligation to share data and costs of newly generated information. And usually there are consortia agreements in place for that, and those, of course, must be followed. It should be kept in mind that category hypothesis may change based on the newly generated supporting or higher tier information. So the initial category justification might not be confirmed at the end of the process. And companies should keep in mind that they may need to react to that. If the category hypothesis does not hold at the very end of the process, then we may go on and open compliance checks to fill in the data gaps. We notice that it's quite resource intensive, this process, both for companies and to us as well. To get the best learnings out of it, we will have a review of the process by the end of this year together with the CEFIC. So how to get involved in this process? If not already done, please sign up for the CEFIC plan. Contact other registrants of similar substances. Establish or review data and cost sharing contracts so that it's absolutely clear to everybody what's happening in that front. Make sure that your substance identity is clear. And perform a data gap analysis. So basically check whether you have enough supporting data. And if you do not have enough of it, we highly recommend to start generating it immediately. There's no need for an ECHA decision for Annex 7 and 8 endpoints or any studies outside the standard information requirements. The next step would be to develop a category read-across hypothesis based on available data, and then possibly refine it later based on the supporting data results once they have come in. Then inform ECHA about your group, and along the whole process, we highly recommend to follow ECHA's advice so that everything goes smoothly. As a summary, I just listed here 3 points. The CEFIC voluntary action plan is indeed your chance to improve compliance of your dossiers and benefit from interaction with ECHA. We will support you. We will give informal feedback before going to the formal testing proposal examination processes, for example. And finally, there is a significant reduce in costs when the data and the new studies are shared between several registrants, and the animal testing is, of course, then minimized. Here I have collected a few links that should hopefully are helpful to you. First, the links to ECHA and CEFIC websites regarding this project. And then ECHA webpage on grouping and read across, so how to perform it so that it fulfills the regulatory requirements. ECHA's chemical universe is a useful place to check whether your substances are in the not yet assigned region or somewhere else. And finally, the recommendations for registrants by us, as mentioned in the previous presentation. With this, I thank you for your attention and hope you a lovely day. Thank you very much. Thank you indeed, Laurence. I hope you can hear me. Please indicate in the QA or chat if you cannot hear me. Okay, we have received quite a lot of questions in the chat and sorry, in the Q&A panel. Some of them are not unfortunately related to this session or the topic of this session, which is to reach improving the compliance of the registration dossiers. So I ask you to send those questions to our help desk. That is, the link is available on the ECHA website. I will answer a couple of questions live. One question was about to whom is ECHA sending draft decisions in REACH IT. It used to be to all co-registrants. However, lately we have had cases where it was only sent to the lead registrants. Indeed, since 2019, we have sent all the draft decisions to all the registrants that where it is applicable to them. So this means that, for example, if there's an Annex 10 lead registrant and all the other members are at lower annexes, lower tonnage bands, and the lead and the only request in the draft decision is at Annex 10 level, then only the lead registrant will be addressed by that. However, if you've noticed an error in this sense, we would be happy to hear about that. So please get in touch with us via the ECHA help desk contact form. We will be, of course, happy to correct any of such errors. Then there was another question. Please, may you expand on the need of updating a registration for which manufacturer has been seized? What is needed from a registrant who is no longer active? I think the question came after Laurence's mentioning that if a decision is adopted already and we notify or a registrant notifies ECHA of a cease of manufacture at that point, then according to our current policies, we still consider that the decision must be executed. And if we don't get the information, then we will notify the national enforcement authorities. However, there are also other occasions when the data must be still provided, or data could be still requested from you, even if you have ceased manufacture. And those situations are described in Article 50, paragraph 4 of REACH. So I invite you to take a look from there. Then we have received a lot of questions on animal welfare and the last resort of animal testing. I will give the floor to my colleague George Cartledge. Please go ahead.
Hi, we're on. Okay, thanks very much. So thanks very much for these important questions about obligations concerning use of animal testing and the last resort. I took one of the questions earlier on, which was about if testing is a last resort, why are test requests for the extended one increasing? There's some explanation needed. So REACH sets out the standard information requirements to be fulfilled, and registrants have obligations to fulfill them. It also requires that alternative methods are considered. For the extended one, there aren't so many alternative methods which could replace the test, and often the most used alternative method would be the read across. And what we see from the evaluation is that read across often isn't applied so well that we get fully compliant information. So if it's not compliant, we can only request the standard test. And that's why we're making these efforts to improve the use of read across. In terms of the last resort, the registrants have obligations to consider other methods. As I said, in the case of extended one, the method most frequently used would be read across, and we've commented on that. So registrants have obligations to consider alternative methods. And then there's another question about ECHA's responsibility and concrete actions to ensure the last resort requirement for animal testing is respected and consider the use of alternative methods. Often it's usually the read across that's the most frequent used alternative of the animal test. So in light of various activities, including EU Ombudsman and things like this, we did make changes to our testing. The registrants have to make a testing proposal and have a decision from ECHA agreed with the member states to allow the testing. And as part of that, they must provide the consideration of alternative methods. So this is one concrete way by which we are showing that, enforcing that registrants consider alternative methods and provide them. And these alternative methods considerations are on our website and are part of the consultation on the third party consultation. So people can see those considerations, and those considerations are addressed in our decisions. So we're very transparent about the consideration of alternative methods. Also, in terms of other concrete actions, so we have informed the national enforcement authorities of occasions when we've seen testing without a testing proposal, and therefore there was no possibility to check them. The last resort has been. I don't know if you can hear me. We're having a slight technical issue.
Can you please indicate in the Q&A tab or chat whether you heard George's answer to the animal welfare issues, because we are getting mixed signals here and we are not sure.
Oh, now the sound is great.
Yes. Okay, good. Then let's go.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So one authorities, if we find that testing was done without following the testing proposal procedure, whereby we couldn't assess whether the last resort had been followed, last resort principle had been followed. So those are some of the concrete actions. The other actions, of course, are what we're doing here today is to try and promote the use of well-conducted reader process. This is one of the best methods, alternative methods for addressing some of these higher tier. That hopefully addresses the question.
Thanks a lot, George. Then I will take another question live from the chat. From Gesine Rehman. Groups in pilot study quoting similar structure and hazard properties, and the previous session Q&A mentioned that similar hazard properties not necessarily a criterion for grouping. These approaches seem to be contradictory. I am happy to explain. The previous session talked about ECHA's way of addressing the chemical universe by a grouping approach, where we only go through the database based on the structure of the substances and try to form reasonable groups for this screening and identifying the most hazardous substances from there, and also the ones that are not dangerous. However, in this in the pilot study under this CEFIC ECHA collaboration program, this is a different approach. This is for the registrant to develop a category of their substances, or in collaboration with other registrants, in order to reach compliance of their registration dossiers. And there we have to apply Annex 11 1.5 criteria on read across and categories, which means that the similar structure and hazard properties must be considered together. So in summary, these are two different approaches. One is from the industry side, from the company side, to trying to reach compliance and adapt the information requirements according to Annex 11, while the grouping approach by ECHA has a different purpose. it is meant to go through the database, ECHA's database, and that is based on structural similarity only, that grouping. I hope that was clear. Then we have a couple of questions on the zero tolerance approach, whether we could provide some further information on this one. As you all probably already know by now, zero tolerance towards non-compliance was it is a concept mentioned in the chemical strategy by the Commission, and indeed zero tolerance should be the target. However, we are still discussing on the ways how to reach this, and several different options to at least increase compliance is of course on the table. But there's no clear-cut criteria for the concept of zero tolerance towards non-compliance. I will then try to find another one. There is one question on the standard time for the Member State Committee to discuss comments on a draft decision. And there's an example, even 2 meetings have passed and the substance has not been discussed. REACH specifies timelines after the draft decision has been notified to the Member State competent authorities. The decision-making process is described in Article 51, where the timelines are also described. So it might be possible that in your case, in this specific case, the draft decision has not yet been notified for a reason to the Member State competent authorities. But if it is, or once it is, let's put it this way, once it is notified to the Member State competent authorities, then a decision must be adopted within a certain timeline. I understand we are coming to the end of our session.
We will keep answering until 1:30, or else is the help desk.
All right. I think we're coming to an end. If your question was not answered by our team here or online by me, then I ask you to send it to the ECHA help desk. We will be here for a certain while still trying to answer those. I will go offline from the video, but you can still ask questions in the Q&A, and we will try to answer as many as possible. So thank you so much for joining us today for this session. I hope we can see each other in person in one of our events in the future. And the next session will be on PFAs starting, I guess, very soon now. So thanks a lot for all the attendance and for all the questions. I hope you got useful information. And we will make sure to answer all questions either via the written Q&A record after the event, or then you can also, of course, send it to the ECHA help desk.